Hi, we're now into the third recording of our series. Firstly, there was a time when I found a great deal of freedom in terms of understanding the Spirit, and that was that a particular person was talking about the issue of the Spirit and put forward an idea which I embraced and felt very, very comfortable with, and that was that our spirit comes from the Creator of all things, and the Creator took from himself or herself, whichever way you want to put that, certainly the Creator took from himself the essence of what would become our spirit. In other words, from this infinite amount of himself, he took bits of himself, and it was so specific as I began to unpack it, in that the Creator knew the background and the ancestry that would be relevant to this spirit, and so there would be a DNA influence coming through. There would be, the Creator knew the journey that we would be going on, and would put into that all the things that we needed for the journey. And as I realized that more and more, I became absolutely deeply moved by that the Creator would go to so much trouble in order to bring that about. And so this is not a religious thing, this is a spiritual thing, and this comes from the source of spirit, the Creator. And so I just have this great awareness that every human being ever created had within them their essence of who they were, their spiritual essence from the moment of conception. As the two cells, the sperm and the egg, came together, the spirit came into that and fully occupied it. It can occupy a cell, it can occupy billions of cells, it can just occupy that. And so it's there right from conception. So we now have this incredible awareness that the Spirit is then present from that moment for the rest of our life while ever we're here. And so the interesting part about that is that our heart develops over a period of weeks, and certainly over a period of some weeks you can pick up detections of a heart beating on scans. And so the other part of that is our cognitive abilities is not mature until some months after birth. So it's 9 plus some months afterward before our brain part of us is actually able to function as an entity and begin then to develop. So it evolves over a period of time. So here we have the spirit. So we can see very easily that any influences that occur during the pregnancy occur directly to the spirit and nothing else to any significance. And I find that enlightening, in some ways challenging, in some ways pretty scary. You say, well, why would I have those different views? Well, I just think that if we knew about how precious this being was from the moment of conception, we might look upon that conception a bit differently. For instance, I find I'm pregnant, says the lady. Her first responses is something that impacts hugely on the developing baby inside. And if it's welcomed, oh, how good would that be? But if it's just such that, oh, this is untimely, I really am not ready, I think maybe we need to think about termination. Maybe we need to think about some of these things. We just really can't afford this. And so this inner being then has a sense that somebody wants to kill them. And that then creates what I would call forsaken. I couldn't say abandonment, but I won't say abandonment because I think, I've said before, abandonment is an irreversible issue, whereas I think obviously these people can change their views subsequently. And you say, well, okay, say along the way we realised that we had said something really awful to this, or thoughts about this baby that were really destructive. We could basically go to the child and say, hey, I'm sorry I said those things. It was unintentional. I didn't intend to do you harm. I was just trying to solve a problem, not realising that you were a being. And so you could just say, would you forgive me? And the inner child, or in this case, the fetus, would forgive. And that would be something really quite a healing kind of activity if we realise that. An example I take from this is an example of a man came for counselling, and in the process of counselling he said that he had always had a bit of a difficulty with his son, and that was something that he was not able to resolve. And he said that God spoke to him and said, you never wanted this child, and that is a significant reason why you and your son have never got on. He was taken aback by this voice from the Creator and felt, totally guilty, and obviously repented of it all. And he then went to his son and spoke to him and said, I'm sorry that I didn't accept you when you came. It wasn't intentional that I would do you harm, but I have. Would you forgive me? And the son responded by forgiving the father for what he had done. They embraced, and he said they sobbed together for some time, and there was some healing. And these two were then adults, so those things that happened early on remain so unless they are dealt with. And so we have that kind of situation. Now, from my own experience, which put me on the pathway of this, was where I read an article, a pediatric article, which said, if you want an independent child, may the mother be a grieving mother. So a grieving mother can produce an independent child. This is what the research said. So I asked my mother about my situation and saying, well, I thought I was a bit independent. She said, independent? She said, you walked at 7 months, you bathed yourself at 10 months and nobody touched you again. Now that's independence. She wanted a nice, happy, chirping little girl, and she got a very remote, disconnected little boy as her child, who fought the breast and all things. So there was never any connection that occurred there. And so, well, why was that? Okay, according to the research, it must have been grieving. Must have been an issue. So I said to her what had happened. And she said, well, at the wedding, I said, I looked, the photo looked happy, so I wasn't. Dad was standing there, and if he lost it, I was going to lose it. So they had a deep, deep relationship between her and her father. And so nothing was said. So it was a grief that was suppressed. Because now she's married and they go off on the honeymoon, all sorts of things. And within a short period of time, I was conceived. And so I think from the research, it's probably a factor that a grieving person may cause difficulty, but I think probably any suppression of the grief would actually create the problem of the separation. In other words, the two spirits would not connect. And so the spirit of the inner child would not be able to connect with the mother, and so would then do what fetuses do to survive. They withdraw and they become independent. And so being independent sounds fine, but it took me decades to realise that behind that there was a terror. And what I said for a long time, when I realised what it was, I said, well, I had this terror of abandonment. But really, over time, I've had to change that as I've understood abandonment more clearly. Jesus said to his father in that time when he was on the cross, he said, why have you forsaken me? And so I realise now in that situation I felt forsaken. And the reason I stay with that really is that throughout my life and my mother's life, there was a chance that that could have been repaired. Throughout my life, I knocked on her door in order to try and have that resolved, but it never ever happened. And so I realised that probably I had Mum on the high ground and wanted her to be all that I wanted her to be, and out of her woundedness, it was just not possible. And so I then, over a long period of time, had to deal with those sorts of issues. The problem being that people who have that kind of feeling in the uterus, being forsaken, can get into awful troubles because we come out and we look for somebody to connect with, and that can become a huge, huge issue. And I was trying to connect with whoever, and what happens in that situation is you can be groomed. Somebody can come along and show you attention, and you are so vulnerable. And as a result of that, I was sexually abused by 2 people. And so I just put out there that the issue of sexual abuse, whilst there can be situations where the child is so young that they are just abused without any kind of protection, I'm also saying that those people who have felt forsaken are very much able to be manipulated and can be groomed by people. And so out of all that, I just need to let you know, from my experience as well, that this issue of being forsaken can lead to sexual abuse. And I need to be able to say to you very clearly that we need to be aware that sexuality is a spiritual issue. And it was very clear for me when that first happened, because what happened was I knew that these, out of sexual intimacy, God created new life. So I knew it was spiritual. And so I knew that in the perfect situation where both people came together with unconditional love, that was the perfect environment. And so I just think that lots of times that just doesn't happen. And sexuality outside of that situation is extremely damaging to the spirit. And so we need to be able to address it in that kind of way. And so I leave you with those sort of thoughts about sexuality and its impact on the spirit of the person. So we'll go on next time to something further.